June, I turned 66 years old. In July, I received my first Social Security check. I hope you've noticed that I did not retire. In July, my younger brother, Joy, did retire. He told me that work was getting hard for him. At the school where he had worked as custodian for over a decade, at his retirement, he commented that he wouldn't have to carry any more boxes. Joy and I would talk on the phone occasionally. I would exchange messages with him on Facebook, chat occasionally. Most of those communications were brief. I often wondered if I was interrupting a ball game he was watching. While I seldom watched sports, Joy was always watching sports. At the end of July, Joy and I talked on the phone. We talked about all kinds of things. Joy was happy to be retired. The phone call lasted 41 minutes. I have not seen Joy since 2015, when our family gathered to bury my mother. Joy didn't drive long distances. While I made a few trips to Oklahoma during the time period, it was usually to events at Oklahoma Christian or to see Christina when she still lived in Oklahoma. I had intentions of going to see Joy or of somehow getting him to Mart for a visit, but it hadn't happened. Debbie and I decided to attend this year's homecoming at Oklahoma Christian. We were going to go from there to Plainview to see those two wonderful grandchildren who are with us today, and their parents also. I was going to call Joy and see if he wanted to visit, since we would be passing through the town where he lived. On Monday evening, October 29th, I was chatting on Facebook with my other brother, Eddie. He asked if I had heard from Joy. He and my sister hadn't been able to reach Joy in a few days. I contacted one of the ministers at Joy's church and asked him to check with some others about Joy. Immediately, one of the elders went to Joy's house and discovered that he was dead. He probably had died of a heart attack several days before. The long phone call in July was our last. Instead of a visit with Joy, we went to his hometown to remember and celebrate his life with friends, former co-workers, and family. I had waited too long to go see my brother. The unexpected death of my little brother is a reminder of the danger of procrastination. That is a key message in our text today. On the Sunday before winter begins each year, I preach from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 9 through 21. Do your best to come to me quickly. For Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Tychicus to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, and my scrolls, especially the parchments. Alexander the metal worker did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done. You too should be on your guard against him, because he strongly opposed our message. At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them, but the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack, and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. Greet Priscilla and Aquila and the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus stayed in Corinth, and I left Trophimus sick in Miletus. Do your best to get here before winter. Eubulus greets you, and so do Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you. Paul wrote these words from a cell in a Roman prison during what we call his second imprisonment. Some scholars believe Paul was made the scapegoat for Nero's burning of Rome. Nero set fire to Rome in order to rebuild it to his own designs. Since Nero was suspected of starting the blaze, he blamed the Christians for it and ordered them all to be executed. Paul was charged as a criminal. According to tradition, he was beheaded. The letter to Timothy is a genuine, warm, tender, loving expression of the feelings of an old man living out his final hours before his execution in a cold, dark, damp Roman dungeon. It is a spiritual last will and testament of sorts, the dying wish of the faithful old apostle saying farewell to a beloved traveling companion and friend. It is clear from this moving letter that he expects to be executed. It is filled with tenderness and sadness, yet triumph, glory, and deep thankfulness similar to that expressed in his letter to the Philippians. Paul anticipates his own crown of righteousness, chapter 4, verse 8. His heart is full of love for his friends. Leon Morris writes, "This is a very moving document as we see the aged apostle facing death, looking back at his service for God, and taking tender concern for his son in the faith, that he be strong in the task to which God has called him." As we come to the end of 2 Timothy chapter 4, we are reading the final recorded words of the Apostle Paul. The curtain will soon close on his life. What was on Paul's mind at the end of his life? His last recorded words are mostly about people. He has some personal considerations. Paul says that he is alone except for Luke. He mentions Demas, a friend who had left him in his time of need, choosing to love the world instead. He thought of other good friends, Crescens, Titus, Tychicus, who were serving the Lord in other places. He is grateful that Luke has remained in Rome to give him comfort while in prison. Paul asked Timothy to come and to bring Mark. You may remember that some years earlier, Mark had deserted Paul and others on their mission trip. There was such a sharp disagreement over taking Mark on another mission trip that Paul and Barnabas parted company. Now Paul says, he is helpful to me in my ministry. Paul mentions a man named Alexander. He was a metal worker who opposed Paul and did all he could to stop the preaching of the gospel. Paul sends special greetings to friends in distant places, and he sends Timothy greetings from friends in Rome. Paul gives thanks to God for standing by him in his trial when it seemed that all had forsaken him. The Lord had delivered him from the mouth of the lion and will continue to deliver him, so that he has complete confidence that he will one day enter the heavenly kingdom. Paul also expresses some personal desires and personal needs. He asks Timothy to come and to bring his coat and his reading material. The coat was a garment like a poncho. It could be used as a blanket also. He asked him to bring reading materials. We don't know the content of those materials, but Paul was a student, even in his last days. 1,500 years later, William Tyndale, known for his work on translating the Bible into English, was imprisoned in a cold, damp cell in winter. He wrote these words to a friend: "I entreat you, send me the things I left, a warm cap, a warmer cloak. The one I have is very thin, a woolen shirt of mine, but above all, my Hebrew Bible." Paul also has some practical considerations. Above anything else, Paul wanted Timothy to come see him in prison before he died. Remember that Timothy is probably in Ephesus, hundreds of miles away, and it would take some time for him to come to Rome. The aged apostle wanted to see his young friend one final time before he died. Listen to Paul's request. Do your best to come to me quickly. And then in verse 21, do your best to get here before winter. The King James Version translates the last part of verse 21 with three simple words: come before winter. Timothy needed to come while he could travel. He needed to come before Paul's death. If Paul did not see Timothy soon, he would never see him again in this life. Warren Wiersbe observes, all the ships would be in port during the winter, since it would be too dangerous for sailing. If Timothy waited too long, he would miss his opportunity to travel to Paul, and then it would be too late. Basically, Paul is saying, Timothy, if you're going to come at all, come now. Don't wait. Don't delay. I won't be alive much longer. Come quickly, my friend. Come before winter. We see from Paul's admonition that procrastination is dangerous. We don't know what Timothy did, but I'd like to think that he picked up Paul's code books and papers, booked passage, and sailed for Rome. He would land near modern Naples and take the Appian Way north to Rome. There he would find the apostle and spend the winter with him. They would read, pray, plan, and remember. They'd likely sing. That's what Paul did in prison years earlier in Philippi. Tradition says that in the spring, Nero condemned Paul to death. I suspect that Timothy, Luke, and Mark accompanied the great apostle to the place where he was beheaded. Paul's admonition to Timothy reminds us that every great opportunity of life has its limitations in time. A Saxon king once put down a rebellion. He placed a burning candle in a castle window and sent out a message to the rebels. If you surrender and repent while the candle burns, you will be forgiven and set free. After it goes out, it will be too late. Life's opportunities are like this. Always time is passing. Alexander the Great was once asked what the key was to his success, and he responded, I acted time and time again without delay. In Thornton Wilder's play Our Town, Emily says to the stage manager, do human beings ever recognize the importance of now, the importance of time? And the stage manager says, no, not really. The only ones who do are the saints. Part of Paul's message is get prepared. That is what he is trying to do. There are some wise old proverbs like, dig the well before you are thirsty, and don't wait until winter comes to get in the wood or the fire. Paul, in a sense, is facing winter. And he isn't waiting until it comes to get ready. Even now, he is in the winter of the Spirit. He writes, for I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. But he is coping. He has what it takes to get through the winter to the time when spring breaks through, whether it is in this life or the next. Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, the 11th edition, defines the word almost as very near, but not quite. The word almost is a word of failure. It is saying you almost got there, but you didn't make it. There are some things in life that are so urgent, that are so vital, that are so crucial, that we dare not put them off. None of us is promised tomorrow. We need to come before winter in several areas of life. We need to come before winter when it regards our friends. W.A. Criswell, a well-known preacher of a past generation, spoke of a good friend he had when he was a student at Baylor University. They had both grown up in the Texas Panhandle and felt a bond. While Criswell was preparing to become a preacher, his friend was planning to go into the oil business. The friend graduated a year ahead of Criswell. They made a visit together the following summer. The friend told Criswell he was going to make $1 million and support Criswell in his ministry. After the visit, the friend returned to his home in Oklahoma. It was the last time W.A. would see his friend. Criswell finished school and moved to Oklahoma to work as a preacher. He went to a certain lake in Oklahoma and stood there by the side of that lake. He had a little quiet devotional and remembrance at the lake where his friend had drowned. How many times have you wanted to write a letter to someone and never did? How many times have you wanted to call someone on the telephone or send someone an email and never did? How many times have you wanted to say, "I'm sorry" to someone and never did? How many times have you wanted to say, "I love you" to someone and never did? How many times have you wanted to thank someone and never did? Also, when we think of our friends, we need to ask ourselves, do I have a friend with whom I need to share the gospel? We need to come before winter in regards to our family. Do you need to say, "I love you" to someone? If so, do it now. The story is told of a man whose wife died suddenly. They'd been married for over 40 years. At the graveside, as the husband stared at his wife's coffin, with tears in his eyes, he said, "She was the light of my life. She brought such joy to our home. She did everything for me. She was the perfect wife and companion. I loved her so much, and once I almost told her so." What a sad, sad statement to make. How pitiful were those words, "I almost told her so." If you intend to spend time with your children, do it now. They won't be home forever. There are many things you can do later, but you only have now to raise your children. In one home, a plaque hung in the window over the kitchen sink that said, "Raising children, the days are long, but the years are short." There's a haunting tune that was popular some years ago entitled "The Cat's in the Cradle." It is a story set to music of a father who is always too busy for his son. As the song goes through its verses, the father grows older and the son grows into maturity. The father reaches retirement and decides that now he has both the time and the deep desire to relate to his son in a way in which he did not during his peak working years. But now, of course, the tables are turned, and the verses which had been the father's part early in the song are now sung by the son. The son has learned the priorities of life all too well from his father, and so now he has no time for his father, just as once his father had no time for him. We also need to remember the elderly. One of the most significant demographic facts affecting our society is the aging of our population. The number of older Americans aged 65 and older has increased nearly 3 times as fast as the rest of our population. In the last century, the number of Americans over 65 increased from 3 million to 40 million. In the next 40 years, that number is expected to reach 66 million. Debbie and I make frequent trips to see her parents, more so than we used to. They're 87. There have been some health problems. They've gone through a great change in life as they sold their home and gave away many of their belongings they'd collected for over 66 years of marriage. We need to give attention to the elderly now. Their winter is coming soon. We need to think about our relationship with Jesus before winter. Dwight L. Moody, the famous evangelist of an earlier day, returned from a meeting and reported to the family hosting him 2½ conversions. I suppose you mean 2 adults and 1 child, his host said. Why, no. I mean 2 children and 1 adult. You see, children can give their whole lives. The adult has only half a life to give. Today is the day of salvation. Tomorrow may never come. The Bible always says today, not tomorrow. Come to Christ while you have the opportunity and while you have the desire. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2 tells us, I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. We should take Martin Luther's advice to live every day with the day of our death placarded before our eyes. Some things in life need to be done now. Otherwise, it may be too late to do them. Others may die. We may die. Jesus may come. David Rubinoff, the violin virtuoso, toured the country for many years, captivating Americans with his artistry. At 90, Mr. Rubinoff was still performing, especially before young audiences who were simply enthralled by the music that poured from Rubinoff's violin. Each time he played, he ended by reading a poem engraved in a watch presented to him by his friend, the late Will Rogers. For the clock of life is wound but once, and no one has the power to tell just when the hand will stop, at late or early hour. Now is the time we have. Live, love, toil, work with a will. Do not wait for tomorrow, for the clock may then be still. As a youngster in Oklahoma, I heard Rubinoff play his $100,000 Stradivarius violin. That is my first memory of that poem. The music was wonderful, but the poem was powerful. I discovered that there is a middle verse to the poem that apparently wasn't engraved on the watch. And that verse goes like this. To lose one's wealth is sad indeed. To lose one's health is more. To lose one's soul is such a loss that no man can restore. That verse gives the reason to use the time we have and not procrastinate. Paul said to Timothy, come quickly, come before winter. We need to make sure